It's New Brew Thursday! Woo! And we are at Firestone Walker with Matt Brynildson.
That is pronounced correctly.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yay!
I was trying to intentionally pronounce that wrong so you could correct me, but apparently I practiced a lot, so.
Good job.
I'm now stuck. So.
Well done.
But yeah, we're at Firestone Walker. We're in the sour barrel area.
In the forklift traffic zone.
And the forklift traffic zone, so I may get hit by a forklift. It's
One
just,
can only hope.
It's all for the internets. What are you gonna do?
Exactly.
So, but yeah, we're since we're standing right here, tell us a little bit about what we're standing. I mean, I'm seeing Solus with Brett Wallaberry, getting very excited.
I tried to find the quietest spot in the brewery, which is difficult, and this is kind of our little area we have set aside for our sour beer project. Jim Crook's our quality manager. This is his side project, what he does when he's not busy trying to ward off Brettanomyces, Pediococcus.
Preventing this from getting anywhere near the brewery.
Tries to force it all in this direction.
Yeah, after we leave this area, you're not allowed back in the brewery. Nice. Burn my clothes. You guys can go home.
You have to go through a clean room, decontaminate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have to go in one of those rooms where we get sprayed with gas and disinfectant.
I'm not going in there with you.
So, you know, we're going to be talking about anniversary later, and that's a clean barrel program, completely different room.
Right.
This is about 40 or 50 barrels in this space that have been set aside, predominantly wine barrels, for just making sour beer.
Right on.
And my mouth is watering because of it.
And you do something that's called the SLOambic series?
Well, we have
SLOambic series.
Yeah, we have one beer we call SLOambic.
Okay.
It's kind of what we call an indigenous beer here in that it's somewhat spontaneously fermented. When I say that, we're using wine barrels. It's beer that's laid down in wine barrels, allowed to kind of funk out. And then we use alola berries, which are grown locally. I always used to say it was an indigenous fruit to SLO County, and then I learned later it actually came from Oregon and migrated down here.
Okay.
We can forget about that. It's,
yeah.
We can ignore that.
That's Oregon. No, just kidding, Oregon. Love you. Anyway, the SLOambic, you call it that because you're not technically allowed to call it a lambic, right?
Right, and this is the funny thing in this brewery is we usually come up with some kind of fanciful trick name internally so everyone knows what we're talking about.
Right, sticky
and
monkey.
Then eventually, yeah, it surfaces before we're ready to figure out if that means. I think
damn you, internets!
Velvet Merkin's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Right? And then we second guess ourselves and change the name.
That was a sad day
later,
for me. I'm going to say this. I was sitting at my desk and I read that press release and I just thought, oh, sad. Velvet Merkin was the best name of a beer ever.
It throws a lot of curveballs at people, and we try to keep things confusing. You can't find that that's fun.
We figure that confused people drink more beer, so we just like to confuse them as much as possible. I will say we took a tour with one of your media relations guy, Tim, who, even though he's not anywhere near here, I would say he's an awesome dude. And he took us into your bourbon barrel-aged barrel room.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And I swear to God, I walked in there and I felt like I was swimming in the best glass of scotch I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of angel share in that room.
Oh, it smells so amazing in that room. I'm just like, I don't want to leave. But at the same time, I'm also afraid, like, oh, I wonder if he struck a match if this whole room would blow up.
Yeah, that's, we have a very good fire suppression system in there.
So, but I mean, it's just, I love what you guys are doing with the barrels. You guys are known for the barrel programs that you're doing. And is it every beer that you make is on barrels, or?
Well, I think taking a step back, the company in 1996 was really christened on the concept of barrel fermented ales. And so since day one, our flagship double barrel ale was fermented in oak barrels.
Right.
And the family's a wine family. They know barrels better than any of us brewers, especially in the mid-90s. And so to them, it was a simple concept. Yeah, we'll do primary fermentation. We do with our Chardonnays. We do a lot of barrel aging anyway, so this is no problem. Their first experiments didn't go so well. They're doing more what we're trying to do here now, 15 years later. But of course, they're trying to make a straight-ahead English-style pale ale in an oak barrel. So, you know, roll the clocks forward a little bit. By the time they got up and running, they had realized that using a Burton Union system to do primary fermentation was the best way to go. And then once you bring that to the street, and you try to say, hey, we're the only brewery in the country that's barrel fermenting, a lot of people go, oh, well, you know, I was at Russian River, I was at all these other places that use barrels for aging. Right. We spent the first 10 years of our life
explaining the difference.
Primary is clean.
Exactly.
Right.
We just do this primary fermentation. We don't do oak aging. There's a distinct difference. And then for our 10th anniversary, to answer your question, we said, hey, let's do something different. Let's age an oak. and we took to it like a duck to water.
Just so, like, for me, because I have no idea, what is the difference between aging and fermenting an oak?
Yeah, very simply, when we ferment an oak, we're taking wort that hasn't seen any fermentation. We do add yeast a little bit ahead of time to get things rolling, but we do the primary fermentation, the consumption of sugar to produce alcohol and CO2 in the barrel itself.
Okay.
When we oak age, we take a product that's already been fermented out in stainless steel and move it to a barrel for just simply maturation, flavor pickup.
And so when you do the primary fermentation in a barrel, you're not going to get as much of the barrel quality, or
well, it's interesting.
Get more?
It's amazing how much. You just had an unfiltered DBA, and that's 100%
delicious.
Yeah, 100% oak fermented. And if you think about it in terms of just mechanical action, surface area, and what we're using, when we use a brand new American oak to do primary fermentation, the yeast is consuming sugars and it's moving around, and you're getting a lot of contact, and as far as amount of oak imparted on the beer per unit time, it's a lot. Yeah. And so when you taste that beer after only being in the barrel for 7 days of primary, it actually has a pronounced oak character.
Interesting.
But with oak aging, we kind of take it to another level. So we take this new American oak, we ferment on it, we get this nice toasty, bright American oak character. But when we lay things down in these bourbon barrels, in about the first month to 3 months, we pick up this distinctive vanilla bourbon note.
Nice.
And then at about 6 months, coconut starts peeking through. And then when you start getting closer to a year, you start getting toasted almond, deeper coconuts, and you really start infusing some things that are deep in these barrels that takes time to get at.
That's one thing that I was wondering about, because when we talk about, the barrel fermentation versus the barrel aging, you're actually using two very different barrels, because for the Firestone Union system, those barrels are all custom made for you, right? You have like Hooper that's doing that specifically.
And one of the products we do, double DBA, which is an imperial version of our double barrel ale. When we lay that down in new American oak, after tasting it 6-8 months in, I mean, it's so mouth puckering, astringency oak. It's like almost like plywood.
Wow.
And so, winemakers know this better than brewers, and that's why we interface a lot with winemakers. I mean, it takes a specific barrel to get the result, depending on how much time you want to spend, what the product going in, and brewers migrated to bourbon barrels for a couple really good reasons. One, it's already been through the process, it had spirits in it, and as long as it hasn't been manhandled afterwards, this thing is essentially sterilized inside from the high-proof bourbon.
Sure.
So for a brewer, it's a natural.
It's a gold mine, yeah.
Nothing else we need to do to make this thing ready to use, unless you want to rinse a little bit of the booze out of it. I guess the other thing is that because it's been used once, it's a lesser expensive item. I mean, this costs average $100 to $150 to bring into the brewery. Wine barrels can be anywhere. They start at $300, and if you're using French oak, you're talking $800 to $1,500 to $2,000.
So that's why I'd heard like wine barrels, because when you said $150, it's like, wow, I thought they were way more expensive, but it's the wine barrels that get really high in price.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry, when it comes to the wine barrels too, they're also getting a different source of oak that are like smaller forests that are more specific and everything like that. Now, one other thing I was wondering.
Trees, we have to charge them more. Oh, what? Sorry.
French. One thing I was curious about is when it comes to.
You just insulted his heritage.
I'm not French.
That's just another internet rumor.
I love the
Don't
French.
worry about it.
I'm not French.
No, one thing I was wondering is when it comes to sourcing your barrels, are there certain places that you go for your barrels? Like, do you have like certain distilleries that you look at for bourbon barrels, certain wineries, stuff like that? Like, where do all these barrels, where do they come from?
When it comes, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. When you talk about bourbon barrels, we rely heavily on a single source, which is Tom Griffin. We affectionately call him the bourbon barrel hillbilly around here because he'll just pop up out of nowhere with barrels. But he sources predominantly from Heaven Hill.
Okay.
And we're not the only brewery he supplies. He supplies a number of breweries. So up and down the West Coast, you'll see a lot of Heaven Hill breweries. We do draw from other distilleries like Buffalo Trace. We've also drawn from some cognac producers in Europe as well. But we keep going back to Heaven Hill because it really, there's a lot of bang for the buck, and I really think that those flavors work well with our beers and with a lot of people's beers.
Yeah.
When we talk about wine barrels, For this project, the sour beer project, we're sourcing locally, and because we use so few
You're in the right area for that.
and because we use so few of them, we can kind of pick and choose. So you'll see behind us predominantly French oak barrels. Had we bought these new, they'd been cost prohibitive.
Sure.
But you know, you're talking about the cost. If you look at the stave, and you probably can't see it on the camera per se, but if you look at the stave depth here versus the amount of wood that went into this stave, and if we were to look at the head, there's a lot more wood in this barrel.
Okay.
The tightness of the grain, you know, the amount of time it's aged.
Anywhere near that level of complexity for barrel aging.
We could spend an hour
I
talking
was just like,
about
yeah,
that.
they go to a distillery and be like, hey, give me your barrels. We don't care what they are.
So a distiller is looking for something that's completely different to create this barrel than a winemaker is for this. And then for our fermentation program, it's somewhere in between. We predominantly draw wine staves, and we use what looks more closely to a bourbon head that we can draw out a little bit, get a little more liquid into the barrel itself, volume, and then we control the toasting levels. And this has been something we've been experimenting with for 15 years. And I don't profess to be an expert at it, but we know what works for DBA, we know what works for reserve porter, and we know what works for the beers that we put in barrels. And
I have to say, I've never stood this close to a Firestone anniversary beer for this long without opening it and drinking it. So we need to open this beer. And while Matt is doing that, tell us a little bit about your anniversary program. This is your 5th anniversary beer.
Actually, it's the 6th.
Is it the 6th?
It is the 6th.
Was nine released?
Well,
or?
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I never know how to count. Like, I'm always really bad at that.
We all know that. It's okay.
Okay, so yeah, this is your 6th anniversary beer.
Yeah.
And it comes with its own instruction sheet.
It comes with its own instruction. A lot of words on it.
It's like, here's the manual that you need to read before you can breathe and drink this beer.
Two-sided.
Two-sided, wow. Tim wrote this, didn't he?
No, I wrote it, didn't I, Tim? I wrote it. I swear to God, I wrote it.
All right. Wow, I'm going to read this later, I promise.
We'll put it in the
I'm
show
so
notes.
going to make sure that happens.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yes. But tell us a little bit about what prompted the creation, what the actual anniversary beers are, how they're made, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, taking a step back, I had mentioned before that we had done nothing but barrel ferment until our 10th anniversary, and the bosses at that time, Adam and David.
Actually, hold that thought, because I want to cheers this.
Yeah, let's
have some
dive
sips
into
of
this
this while you're talking about it. Cheers to Firestone's 15th anniversary. Oh God, it smells so good. Okay, so now continue.
So we had been fermenting in barrels for 10 years and really concentrating on that format of using barrels. And then Adam and David came to me and said, hey, let's take the governor off a little bit and do something special for our 10th anniversary. And so, if you know much about Firestone, if you followed our history, we've always made very few beers as well as we possibly could. And DBA has always been the flagship. It's always been a lion's share of our sales. Up until our 10th year, we introduced pale ale along the way, IPA, but for the most part, we had like 3 or 4 beers we were making, and none of them were big extreme beers or anything above, say, 5 or 6% alcohol. So when they came to me and said, let's make something special, I kind of got overexcited. Right. We made a Russian Imperial Stout, and I was like, I think this is it. Oh, let's try a barley wine. I made a barley wine. I started making all these different beers, and the only way we really could hide it from anybody was to lay them down in barrels and stick them on the backside of the brewery somewhere. And we started amassing a bunch of different beers, getting ready for this 10th anniversary. And then one day, the light bulb kind of went on, and we're like, wow, let's blend them all together for the anniversary. And who better to ask to come in and help us with that but the winemakers here locally. Right. And, so I went out and started talking to winemakers, and that first time, I can't remember exactly how many people we had, but we had more than a dozen people show up for the blending session. It was quite chaotic.
I bet.
And the one thing I was just trying to manage is that we weren't going to make a mess. But
that happened, didn't it?
Well, we released the beer. I didn't really know how it was going to be received. I mean, we talk about it a lot in the fact that we didn't even hold anything back into our library because we really didn't know if we'd done anything special to to warrant that. And as you know, the beer was widely popular.
Kind of
took off a little bit, yeah.
And in some ways, I mean, regardless if you like the beer or not, it kind of made it known that Firestone was willing to experiment, to kind of introduce people to Firestone.
Yeah, I think it took Firestone to the next level beyond.
Yeah.
Because DBA, I remember drinking DBA in 1998. When I first moved out to California, it was like one of my favorite go-to beers that I could find on the shelf, and that was craft or whatever. Or at the time, we referred to it as micro. But it took, in when you started doing those bigger beers, it really did take Firestone to that next level where it was like, we are more than just a pale ale DBA producer. We can do these other beers that are amazing and super delicious. And Parabola, for example, is one of my favorite of that.
Unbelievable.
And that was the very first, or one of the very first beers we made for the program. So then moving forward, it became, you know, we discussed it after 10. You know, do we want to keep this going? And there was beers left over from that first blend. So kind of my excuse was like, well, we already got this thing started. We got the beers. The kids seem to like it. In for a penny,
in for a pound.
Yep.
And that's when it started becoming kind of our way of experimenting. So each time we came up with a new recipe, you know, rather than try to put it in bottles, put it in kegs, and test it in the market, we just lay it down in barrels and get back to it later, get it in the blend, see what people like. And that's why, you know, it took the better part of 4 or 5 years to release Parabola. We knew it was good internally, we liked it a lot, but we kind of needed that positive reinforcement from outside the brewery to convince us that, hey, I think we got it. And it also gave us time to practice. I mean, the cool thing about that is we probably brewed that beer a dozen times before it ever really saw the light of day as Parabola.
Right. And there are a lot of beers that are part of this series that have, if they have seen the light of day, I mean, it was like, you know, a random keg at a bar somewhere. I mean, you've got Bravo, you've got Sticky Monkey, you got Saucer Full of Secrets, the Sean Paxton beer.
We say that in stereo because we're hoping you have some. Hashtag just saying.
You do, don't you? Somewhere.
Somewhere. He's like, somewhere. Yeah,
He's like, yeah, we do. You're never going to have it, though.
If we were the Discovery Channel, we'd totally be getting some. Just saying.
And then you ask me.
Nice. Yeah, we'd be like, show's canceled. Sorry, we got the beer.
But anyway, so going on to that, because you've released Parabola, you've released Abacus. Are there any other of these individual beers that you're going to be releasing sooner than later?
Funny you would ask that. Actually, this year we are planning on releasing 2 more of the components. And one of them, Velvet Merkin, which actually has seen the light of day as Velvet Merlin, but 100% bourbon barrel aged, will be released, and it's coming out very soon.
And it's going to be in bottle?
Not in bottle this year, only in draft. Only in draft. But we are.
Because when you start bottling that, I will hug you awkwardly.
I will drive 500 miles,
look really
and I will drive 500 more.
But no, I really enjoy Velvet Merkin. I've had it at the From the Barrel event and a few other the Firestone events that you guys have put on.
Yeah.
And it does it does rear its head occasionally and tempt you. And
well, in 2010, it took the gold medal for wood-aged beers at GABF, and so that was a little prompting to say, hey, I think maybe we should do a little more of this. And then it did it again this year. So 2 years in a row brought us to realize that probably we should release that beer, at least in draft.
Speaking of which, congratulations on your success at GABF the last couple of years. You have done very well. I believe that in the pale ale category, you had the gold and the silver in the same order 2 years in a row, if I'm not right about that. Yeah.
He's like, somebody else, I totally did.
Yeah,
he's like,
that just
he's like, how do I be modest? Yeah, fuck it. Yeah, I totally did that thing.
No.
I would say that.
Well, you are listed as being the most award-winning brewer.
Yeah, well, what do you know?
You know,
I mean, the sun shines on some of us for a short while, and then you never know what's going to happen. So you can't take yourself too seriously, right?
Right.
See, I really wanted to hate you for being so successful, but you're so modest, I can't do that. So,
I'll tell you what GABF and winning at GABF is cool is that we bring a lot of our team there, and we get to celebrate together.
Right.
And you bring that stuff home, and I mean, everybody's
I think Firestone's the biggest crowd on the stage when you guys win.
Yeah, we can't help it. I bring my grandpa up there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you guys have done amazing things. It's your 15th anniversary. Tomorrow you're having an anniversary party. How many people are you expecting for that?
We have no idea because we really don't take RSVP or anything like that. So, I mean,
just come buy some bottles and you can go back?
We get a few hundred people, I think, that show up. To finish the thought, though, there's another beer that we're going to release.
Yes.
That we touched on about earlier, and that's double DBA. And that will come out in bottles.
Excellent.
And draft. You know, kind of the first time we do these releases, we do a little bit smaller of a release. Than
will that be a part of the Walker Reserve Series, or will that be on
the Proprietor Reserve Series?
Excellent.
Proprietor Reserve.
Yeah, so we've kind of dissected what we do, and most of it's internally so we can keep things straight. But we have what we call the Pale Series, that's DBA, Pale Ale, and IPA, Union Jack. We have the Proprietor's Reserve Series, that's anything that comes out of the oak barrels, along with Double Jack. We're going to release a new beer in 2012 called Wookie Jack.
Yes.
And Wookie Jack.
Very looking forward to that, actually.
Yeah, that's going to be a rye black IPA. And
I pretty much love anything with rye in it these days.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Me too.
So.
Yeah. I mean, we were trying to figure out what way to get that grain.
That's
in the
your
mix.
first beer that you've done with rye, correct?
It'll be the first release with rye. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I think that beer could also become something interesting to age in bourbon barrels as well, but we'll see. We'll see.
Excellent.
Where was I going with that? So Double DBA is the other barrel-aged beer that will be released.
Right.
The Proprietor Reserve series are kind of the higher-end beers, slightly higher price point because there's so much that goes into them, be it oak or hops or higher gravity stuff. And then we have our seasonal releases, Merlin, excuse me, I can never get it right. And so
I still call it Velvet Merkin myself. So. One thing that stood out to me for this particular blend, because I had this at the Deconstructed with Sean Paxton, where you talked quite a bit about the different blends and whatnot. And you mentioned that you put a lot more Double Jack into it this year than previous years. How do you feel like that affected this year's?
It's interesting because and I might get this wrong, but either on 11 or 12, one of the winemakers, Chris Cherry from Via Creek, was drinking a pint of Union Jack while he was making his blend. And in the end, he's like, and he mixed, he just threw it in there as a joke, and he was like, holy shit, I think I figured it out. And he's like, bam, there you go. And it made the blend. And then since then, we didn't really offer up a hoppy beer into the blend. And then this year, I thought, I think this beer is special enough and it has enough to offer that let's see what happens. And then sure enough, all the winemakers were throwing a lot of it in there. And it's worrisome from a brewer's perspective because typically, and contrary to what a lot of people believe, IPAs are some of the most shelf unstable or flavor unstable beers out there. I mean, if you have a bright, hoppy, beautiful, aromatic beer,
it's not going to last long.
Yeah, exactly. the hops are the first thing that are going to fall off.
And so as soon as these guys started mixing a bunch of hoppy beer in, that's the first thing that comes into my head is like, uh-oh, this thing's not going to age as well as other beers. So, but they kept it really low, and what I'm happy about, and what of course, what I went back to the, my mad scientist lab, and I started picking out year and 2-year-old bottles of Double Jack and making blends with it, knowing that's where it's going to go.
Horrible life you have.
Yeah. But I wanted to say, I wanted to taste for myself, where is this beer going to go? And it actually really works with the beer. So I'm very confident in the way this beer will age.
And that's really interesting because, one thing about the Firestone Anniversary amongst, beer geeks is they are one of the most sellerable beers that you have ever run into. I mean, if you find, any beer geek with a decent beer cellar, he's going to have Firestone Anniversary beers in there. And so it's really interesting to hear you say that because, they talked about the Deconstructed dinner and how hoppy this was. And I agree. I mean, it's
you get a lot of the hop characteristics.
Much more hop forward compared to, the previous years.
That's something we were talking about a couple of shows ago, actually. We brought this beer up and we were talking about the addition of the Double Jack. And I think the conclusion that I came to personally is I think that it tastes amazing right now. It's like 14, I think, was a little hot for me when it first came out, but it aged out just so beautifully. This one is so drinkable right now. It's such a great beer to drink right now.
It has a wonderful floral.
But I feel like maybe in a year it might be just a little bit off, and then in like year 2 it's going to come back and just be amazing. You know.
I mean, when you study Century, you see that rye character that comes from oxidized hop oil. It peaks early, and it peaks high, and then it fades away. And that's probably what will happen to this. You probably nailed it. I mean, it's hard to predict, and I'd never try to predict what the beer is going to do.
That's our job, because then we can be wrong and it doesn't affect anything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it also depends on storage conditions and,
well,
like
and to be honest with you, I mean, we can, in an odd way, control a little bit of that up front. We design recipes for the blend that we believe are going to age well. So that's kind of built into the front end, and that's where bringing Double Jack into the mix is kind of scary, but exciting. And I think what I'm most proud about this year's is how different it is from other years. I don't think that there's no way you can.
It's not nearly as dark. It almost has like a barley wine color to it.
Yep.
Yeah, it has a really nice ruby kind of.
It's a beautiful beer, and it is extreme. I mean, this is definitely a beer that if you're going to buy 15th, buy several bottles so that you can enjoy one right now. When
absolutely.
Because it's never going to taste quite like this again.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful flavor profile.
It's probably one that aging cold, this is a great time where you could age one cold, age one in your normal cellar temperature, and watch them over time, open them both in a year and see what happens.
See how it happens, yeah.
Our whole library we age cold. So if you went into the barrel room, that's where we age all of our bottles as well.
Cold being about?
Well, 45 to 50 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah, so just below cellar temp.
Yeah.
So tomorrow's your anniversary party. You don't RSVP. If you obviously, if you're watching the show, it was last week, so you missed it.
Suckers.
Sorry. But basically, the way you handle your anniversary party, I thought was interesting. Is basically the admission fee is 3 bottles of 15.
I didn't make that rule, but I think it's good. I mean, if you come to buy bottles, we let you into the party.
Right, exactly. I mean, because to me, it's like you're going to buy the bottles anyway, and now you're thanked by a party to go to, you know?
Well, we're I mean, even though we're here in California, we're a little bit isolated from the areas of higher population. So if people are traveling from the Bay Area, from LA, from San Diego, they've driven 3 to 5, maybe 6 hours with traffic, almost 5 hours. So I almost feel like we owe them a little hospitality, and we love to get. Well,
you guys are really good at the hospitality.
Yeah, I was going to say you've done very well for us as far as hospitality goes. Absolutely.
You guys, and historically speaking, your events are amazing. From a Barrel was probably like, that was an event that I went to because somebody else was like, hey, we're going, you should come with us. And I was like, all right. And it didn't seem like it was something I'd be really interested in driving up here for and spending the weekend or whatever. And when I was there, I was like, this is rad. Like, why was I not just like super stoked to come here for this?
I can take very little credit for that event other than making the beer. And in fact, I think one of the beers we poured was one of Jim Crooks's sour beers. So it probably had almost nothing to do with that. Jamie Smith, our marketing manager, put that together. That was his brainchild.
Right.
And Tim and the rest of the crew that helped out with that. So yeah, there's some people behind the scenes here.
Yeah,
that make us
it's
look
not
good.
all the Matt Brynildson show.
No, not at all. Probably most of those guys would be like, Brynildson isn't helping one bit. He's just making
Screw that guy. I got those recipes. I'll go homebrew it and give right back.
Although the forklift guys took off of that.
Exactly.
That was good timing on their part for sure.
But you have several events coming up in the next year, as well as a new one that Tim was telling me about. So we have a he's going to lip to me right now.
The Brewer Invitational.
Brewer Invitational, yes, the Brewer Invitational, where you're going to be bringing in like Mikkeller, and you guys are going to be bringing a beer together. That's very exciting.
So far, the first 2 guys to respond to our invitation were Nick Floyd from 3 Floyds and Mikkeller. And here's the concept. It's not to try to make a big buzz with the biggest names in brewing. These are people who are personal friends of mine.
Right.
There are a number of events, you know, Lord knows the world doesn't need another beer festival. But what we noticed is that beer festivals in general, and not all of them, there's some great ones that have stayed true to their roots, like the Great Taste of the Midwest in Madison, Boonville up in Mendocino County. Those guys, we want to paint something that's similar to that in the Central Coast. We want to make sure that a brewer is pouring the beer. We want them to bring something special that they can share with people. And really what it is, it's just like Anniversary. It's an educational event. We want to get people down here, show them the Central Coast, but then also show them what craft brewing is like at its roots from the people who actually make the product. So as much as we love the sales guys in this world, we love the distributors, this isn't about them. This is about brewers and true aficionados.
Well, and it does a good thing for this area because as isolated as you are from the rest of the craft beer community, the people that live in this area are isolated from the craft beer community as well. And so you're kind of bringing that all to them, which is really cool. And I think it's fair to say you get a lot of support from the local community here. I know in sitting down to breakfast this morning, somebody was telling me how much they love Firestone Walker and how excited they were.
Well, and in fact, the original concept wasn't our idea. It was the Pioneer Committee locally who tries to support the roots of Paso Robles and the original farm and agricultural community. And they really try to teach that to the local community, and we have a big parade every year that showcases that. They're the ones who gave us the opportunity, the access to the venue, which is incredible, by the way. We get the whole Mid-State Fairgrounds. We have camping. We've got their venues to use. It's awesome.
Well, and speaking to that too, the From the Barrel event, that location was like that was epic.
So I mean, it just shows you there's a number of gems in the Central Coast. It's not all about Firestone. It's about getting people down here to the Central Coast, introducing them to this community, and hopefully they fall in love like we did. I mean, when I showed up here to work, I had no idea I was going to land in such a beautiful area. And so when the brewery sells next year, like you were telling me, the rumors were, and I'm looking for a job, I'll probably just get flipping burgers downtown slow or something.
Just for the audience, there was a rumor floating around that Firestone Walker was going to be sold and that Matt was moving on to his own project that he was going to be doing. When I asked Matt about that before the show, he laughed at me and said, "I hope not. I just bought a house." So
gonna give him a funny look, like
a
year ago.
Exactly. So I think it's safe to say that we can expect a 16th and 17th anniversary beer from you guys.
At least.
So
I'm fiercely proud of the fact that this brewery has maintained itself independent. Adam and David have, created this out of their own pocketbooks, and Yeah, it's nice to work for an independent.
You've done very well
the
for
only thing
yourself.
I think the only thing better about Firestone Walker than the amazing beer that you make is the really super sexy accent that David has. Just saying. Rawr.
Awkward moments.
Awkward moments. That's what I'm here for. So anyway, we really appreciate you taking your time out of your day. I know it's a busy time for you, as always, but we really just can't.
Yeah,
this is a highlight for me. This
so
is a highlight
awesome.
moment.
Unbelievable.
The last 2 years that we've done the show, we've talked about coming up here constantly, like, you know, because you're just on that level where it's like it's easy to come up here, but it's hard at the same time. And so it's like we've gone to Dogfish Head and the East Coast, and I'm like, God, we got to get to Firestone because you really are a beer that you guys have been producing beer that I've been drinking for over 10 years. And
especially for me personally, I mean, like Firestone beers are like daily drinker beers for me, like, and they have been for a really long time. So coming up here is just such a thrill, and we really, really appreciate it. It's nice. Such a pleasure.
And we're really just kissing up to you so much because we want to buy some 15th today.
You want to drink up some of these.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to drill a hole in the barrel.
But no, we do really appreciate your time, and of course, until next week, stay safe and drink beer. Unique New York.
Sorry.
The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.
The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.
You ever seen Anchorman?
No.
Will Ferrell?
Yeah.
He sits there behind the thing, and he's like, Unique New York. The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.